Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from IGI Cyber Labs. We'll get started in just a few minutes on today's topic around building a cyber culture. We're fortunate enough to have the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance to talk about what they've learned over the last year, what took place when they hosted the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, as well as to give you some ideas as small business leaders and owners as to things that you can do to get started to building a cyber culture. We'll get started in just a minute. We're just waiting for some of the registrations, some of the attendees to log in. So thank you very much. And I'll be back to you in just a minute or so to get started. So welcome, everyone. Lisa, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I want to thank everybody for participating today in our SMB educational webinar series. As you know, we've had a series of these, about over a dozen of them, almost 20 since the springtime on a variety of topics, from cyber insurance to cybersecurity liability, to how do you get started, to how can an MSP help, to some things around compliance and how do you work with NIST and how do you work with the CIS 18 and how MSPs can support small businesses. Today, we are fortunate to have a conversation about how do you build a cybersecurity culture and how do you begin to educate your organization if you're just getting started. Before we get started, just a couple of things. If you have a question, please put it in the question box or the chat box. We will do our best to get to all of those. We will be recording today's session, and we will have both the recording and the video available for people to watch probably by Monday of next week. We also have the ability to follow up on any questions. So if you join our LinkedIn event and you want to ask questions, you want to connect to your peers, you can do that as well. We will follow up with you through email on not only after today's session, but we have upcoming sessions coming up. We have one in January specifically around how MSPs will be helping small nonprofit organizations that need help with cybersecurity. And we will have a series of sessions in the first quarter around small healthcare organizations, around K through 12, state and local businesses, as well as SMB owners and leaders in general about the various topics confronting them around cybersecurity. So if you go to the next slide. With that, I mentioned this, we're going to have this session coming up. It is on our website. It is on LinkedIn. Feel free to register for that. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in advance, and we will cover your questions on the session. It'll be included in the recording. So even if you can't attend live, you can watch the rebroadcast and get the information back from you after that. We are very interested, as always, in collaboration and people coming together to help each other. So whether it's through our programs or whether it's through LinkedIn, we'd very much like to have you involved with that. If we go to the next slide. With that, I want to introduce Lisa. We are fortunate enough to have Lisa with us today. They have spent the last year, preparing for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. She's got some things to update us about things that they've learned during that period, as well as research that they have done around building a cyber culture. How do you get started? What do the experts have to say? And most importantly, while people are so busy in these trying times with all the attacks and running your business and all the focus you have on your business, how can you spend a couple of minutes that can be effective and productive for your employees around cyber culture, and some of the issues that they're facing. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa, and just thank you in advance for talking to our audience today and taking our questions.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Stuart. So a little bit more about the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We are partially funded by the Department of Homeland Security. And in short, we empower a more secure, interconnected world. We advocate for the safe and secure use of all technology. We are the founders of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, Data Privacy Day, which we're turning into Data Privacy Week this January, and a couple other programs. One of them very relevant to small businesses called Cybersecure My Business. But we have the world's best URL, staysafeonline.org, and if you go there, you can learn all about our programs and events and free resources to help you stay secure. So as Stuart mentioned, we did some research this year that we call Oh Behave. This is partially funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and we surveyed 1,000 people in the US and 1,000 people in the UK. We worked together with a vendor in the UK called CyberSafe. It's all about behavioral science in cybersecurity. So, people's attitudes and behaviors largely affect their decision making, their attitudes and emotions, rather than their sort of rational mind. There's a behavioral science model that you see here that says that in order for us to form a new habit or change a behavior,
Lisa, I think we lost you temporarily.
start a new behavior, start a new habit until you have all three pieces of this puzzle. And this stuff is really hard. It's harder than you would think. If this was easy, I'd weigh 20 pounds less, I'd go to the gym more, my garage would be clean. There's all types of things that we know we should do, that we have the capability, the knowledge to do. We're just not motivated. That's really the hard piece. When you think about trying to influence your employees' behavior to keep your business secure, it's not so much about knowledge as it is about emotions. I come from the world of marketing and advertising. I worked for Ford Motor Company for a long time, and there's an advertising guru out there named Seth Godin, who's got a website and a blog and books and all that interesting stuff. And he says people are irrational, and they usually make decisions that have nothing to do with facts. And yet we spend most of our time improving our facts and very little concern with the rest. So we might have policies, we might have, an employee handbook that dictates some secure behaviors that we want our employees to exhibit, processes, policies, things like that. So we spend a lot of time, maybe telling our employees what to do and what not to do. But do we really address that motivation piece? Do we engage them emotionally? To try and change their behavior, to motivate them. And that's really what this survey was about. So we asked people, and these are people from all demographic groups, from students through retirees. We asked them about these 6 behaviors: creating and managing passwords, using multi-factor authentication, installing updates, patching, checking for phishing, recognizing and reporting phishing, and backing up data. And we asked them about their feelings at the outset. So we asked people, how do you feel about cybersecurity? How does it make you feel? Is staying secure online important to you? And of course, the vast majority of people, especially if you add up people in the strongly agree and the agree column, you've got a lot of people that will say, yeah, that's important to me. We ask them if they prioritize staying secure online. And likewise, people will say, yes, I agree with that statement, or I strongly agree with that statement. This is a high priority for me. But as you'll see, as we delve a little further into the results, that doesn't always mean that they've taken action. We ask people about their confidence with security issues. So for example, how do you feel about your ability to recognize a phishing email or a malicious link? And those are very important things that employees need to know how to do. most people feel pretty confident about this. This isn't really a surprise that they feel confident about it. There's a little bit of an Achilles heel there, because we feel very confident in our ability to recognize a phishing email. But the reality is that most data breaches all start with a phishing email. So why is this? Why is there this disconnect between our confidence level and how these things actually play out in reality, the fact that phishing is still a big problem and people are susceptible to it? Well, there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, more than a couple now, it's been a little while. But what it basically says is that we overestimate our own confidence in our own abilities until we learn more about a topic, and then we realize that there's stuff we don't know. And then we sort of lose confidence in our abilities, and then as we learn more, our confidence goes up. So getting your employees over that hump of the Dunning-Kruger effect to realize that, okay, you might feel confident that, like, oh, I would never fall for that, right? That's somebody else who would get tricked by that phishing email. You know, having them realize through whatever security training you do with them that this really is a problem. It's not the Nigerian prince anymore. These phishing emails are very sophisticated. So this is an example of one that's super sophisticated and very hard to tell that it's a phishing email. I used to work for a business that was in the automotive technology space after I worked for Ford, and we had car dealers as our customers, right? And a lot of those are small and medium-sized businesses. And this is a phishing email that was received by one of our salespeople from the chief financial officer of a car dealership. And it was not from a spoofed email address. The email address was legitimate. It was from the CFO. And this was sent to a salesperson who was in the sales cycle with this customer. And of course, the salesperson clicked. He gets this email, DocuSign. He says, "Yay, my contract has come through. I've closed this deal. I'm going to click on this email." And so luckily, our technology prevented anything bad from happening. This actually did take you to a credential harvesting website, a malicious website, but we were able to catch it. And so when I talked to that salesperson, I said, "So, were you expecting a DocuSign?" And he said, "No, I was expecting a contract from this customer. We were in the sales cycle, but I wasn't expecting a DocuSign." So I said, "Well, then, the safe thing to do, if you're not specifically expecting that, would be to pick up the phone and call the customer and say, is this really from you?" But this is a toughie. The only real clue that this is a phishing email is that a legitimate DocuSign email, and I didn't know this until this happened, a legitimate DocuSign email actually includes a serial number. So this is really tough. The way this happened was that car dealership had their network compromised. There was a bad guy who had access to the chief financial officer's email box. And he was reading what was in there and sending phishing emails that were contextual, right? That made sense, that he just, suddenly that email thread is in the hands of a bad guy, as opposed to being used by just the owner of that email box. So that makes it really tough when you've got other businesses in your supply chain that you do business with, and one of them has been compromised and somebody uses that then to attack your business. It's difficult. And so we have to sort of train our employees that these things, you have to have spidey senses, right? That salesperson might not have known that this email should have had a serial number, but they did know that they weren't expecting a DocuSign. So picking up the phone and calling the customer, at the number that you know to be their phone number, not the number that's in the email, so you're not calling a bad guy. That's really the best thing you can train your employees to do. I've seen other examples, especially with accounts payable, in any sort of procurement process or billing process, where we had a vendor who, same situation, bad guy is in the vendor's email, sees that there's some back and forth between our accounts payable and that vendor on getting an invoice paid, and suddenly, oh, here's a new routing number. We've changed banks. Can you now send the funds to this number and this account instead? And so training your employees that any change in process like that should be met with that's a red flag. That's the time to pick up the phone and ask. The way that our employee caught that was they, instead of just replying to whoever was in the email thread, they actually forwarded to another person that they knew was in the finance department of that vendor, and that person said, no, wait a minute, this wasn't from us. So these things have gotten super, super tricky. And so it's important that even though your employees might feel confident that they won't get tricked, that they understand that phishing still is a real problem. We asked people about their behaviors, specific behaviors in the survey, and I'll start with passwords. We asked people what their preferred method was for remembering passwords. And unfortunately, 31%, the most popular answer was, I write them down in a notebook. That is not a good idea. That's problematic, right? If anybody has physical access to that notebook, then you've got a problem. We asked people how often they use different passwords for different online accounts. And unfortunately, 47% said never or rarely. That's really, really important, using different passwords for different accounts. What happens is the bad guys will take credentials that they've stolen in one breach and try them on all different accounts, because they know that we love to reuse passwords. It's a bad habit that a lot of us have. I think some of it was brought on by the complexity rules, right? So we start an online account somewhere. There's a long list of bullet points that says your password has to be long, this many characters, and it has to have all different types of characters, numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, all that good stuff. And so we try really hard to come up with something that meets all those criteria, but that's also something we can remember. And so we finally think of something, we think, oh, great, I have the perfect password, but then what do? We use it over and over and over again, or maybe we just change a couple digits at the end or something, or a special character. Well, the bad guys know that we do that. They know that we have that habit. And so so they try to use those credentials on different accounts that they've stolen from one breach. So that's really a problem. We should be using truly unique passwords for every account. So how do you do that? How do you keep that all straight? Well, the answer then is a password manager or password vault. So we asked people about their use of password managers because very few people use them. They're writing their passwords down in a notebook instead. So when we asked this question, I would use a password manager, but we found that the most popular answer was, I don't trust any single provider with managing all my passwords. So we at the National Cybersecurity Alliance have actually embarked on a campaign with all the password manager companies to try and change this misperception. There were some security issues in that industry years and years ago, but those have all been resolved, and those passwords are all stored encrypted, with strong encryption. So and it's not the case that even the employees of those companies, there's not a software developer sitting at LastPass that can see all your passwords. They have an architecture in place that prevents even their employees from seeing your passwords. And if you use multi-factor authentication when you set up one of these password managers, then it's really a much better solution than writing them down in a notebook. So I'm a big advocate for companies using these as well. A lot of people use them in their personal lives. This is just a list of the leading password managers that are out there today. Many of them offer free versions of their accounts. They all have very similar features. Some of them have some different technology on the back end. Some of them use open source. Some of them even hash or obscure the URLs that you visit, the accounts that you have, so that they don't even have visibility into that. Many of them do a dark web check, so they'll tell you if your credentials are available for sale on the dark web. They'll alert you when you're using the same password multiple times, or you're using a password that's too weak. And one of the biggest things to think about here, I think a lot of people think like, oh, this is going to take an entire Saturday afternoon, or this is going to take me way too long to choose one or to actually set one up. And the reality is that if you just get started, if you pick one and you just put, maybe it's your financial services account, your bank accounts and things like that, and you install it on your browser, what will happen is as you visit other accounts, it will prompt you to add those credentials to the vault. And you just click yes, and you keep moving. This isn't as difficult as it would seem. It really doesn't take that much time. I think getting started is the most important thing, getting a couple of your most critical accounts in there, and then the rest of them you can add over time. So don't feel like you have to do it all at once. I think that's a big barrier to the adoption of these tools. But I think, especially in a business setting, if your IT guy says to you, oh, I've got it all handled through SSO, that's a popular IT myth. There are always accounts out there that you're not going to have as part of your SSO solution. So these are a huge help to your employees to make sure they're using unique, long, complex passwords for all the different accounts.
Hey, Lisa, we did get a question.
Sure.
Number 2 on that list was around storing them on my phone. Do you have any comments on how secure phones are and being able to store these on your phone as a way to access them?
I think the most important thing there is having access to your phone and making sure that your phone has either a PIN number or to be able to open your phone, you either have facial recognition or fingerprint, or at the very least a PIN number to open your phone. I think those can be good solutions. For example, if you're kind of an Apple shop, right? If you've got an iPhone and you've got your laptop is a Mac, and you've those kind of solutions can kind of be easier to use if all of your devices are Apple devices. That's not the case in my life. I kind of have a mix of Windows and Apple technology. So I like using a password manager more than that. But that is, I would say, if storing them on your phone is a much better solution than a notebook.
I didn't hear you.
Storing them on your phone would be a better solution than writing them down in a notebook.
Perfect.
If you're using I forget what the Apple solution is, what they call it, the password key or something like that. Any other questions about that?
There might be more that come in, but that was just the first one we got.
Okay. So I mentioned that the best way to secure your password vault is having multi-factor authentication on that vault. It's also really important for your financial services accounts. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if you're using a financial services institution that doesn't have multi-factor authentication, that you need to find a new bank. We asked people about MFA, and unfortunately, 48% of people said they'd never heard of it. I think some of them probably have used it without knowing what it was called. The good news was that of the 52% who had heard of it, 81% had used it at least once. And even better, 90% of them reported that they were still using it. So once we establish that habit, oftentimes it's a lot easier to keep that behavior going. And actually, I'll stop here a minute about MFA. Hopefully everybody knows what this is by now. This is where you have more than one way of proving that you're you, that you don't just know a password to an account, but maybe you have a PIN number that's been sent to your phone, or a push from a Duo Security or one of those authenticators. But this is really, really important. This means that you know, a bad guy on the other side of the world somewhere who might have your password to an account won't be able to get in because they don't have that second factor. So super important, especially for financial services accounts, but also for things like social media accounts, because if somebody gets your company Facebook page, for example, they might be able to use that to attack other people, to scam other people, and that's not good for your brand when that happens. So another super important behavior that you can encourage in your employees is to use multi-factor authentication.
You know, Lisa, just so you know, and a commercial for one of our earlier public service announcements, Alan Alford from TrustMap and Helen Patton from Duo were on one of our sessions in the summer, and they talked about if you're a small business and you're just getting started, you know, if you can find out what devices you have that are vulnerable, and you can implement multi-factor authentication, and you can get an immediate alert when a new device comes on your network, and start to do a few simple exercises like this with your employees. You know, they talked about that as the 3 legs of the stool to get started in small business. And,
yeah, I actually also heard of one of the larger technology companies mandated multi-factor authentication for their customers, and they haven't had a single account-based compromise since. So that's huge, right? Like when one of the major technology providers can come out and say, like, if you do this, you know, bad things won't happen. Like that's it can make a massive difference. It really can. It's one of those sort of key behaviors, which is why I talk about it so much.
no, that's great.
Just a brief word about victims and reporting. From our study, we found that it's actually younger folks that are compromised most frequently. They're very quick to click on things, and but when they're scammed, it's for fewer dollar amounts. There's less damage done. They have less to lose. It's actually our parents. It's actually aging adults. They get scammed less frequently, but when they do, it's for much higher dollar amounts. And it's really gut-wrenching things like romance scams and things like that, where they end up losing lots and lots of money. If you or somebody in your family or your circle of friends has ever had an issue, it's really important to report. I think we don't think about cybercrime in the same way we think about physical crime, right? If somebody broke into my house, of course I would call the police. If somebody, you know, like I recently had a compromise of a credit card, and I don't really think about necessarily calling the police. I call a credit card company, right? But there are more ways to report now, and reporting is really important because this data gets filtered through to federal law enforcement and helps them make decisions on where to deploy resources if they see large amounts of activity from specific criminal organizations, and they can deploy those resources. So there's a relatively new nonprofit called the Cybercrime Support Network. They have a way, they're working state by state with the 311 infrastructure in those states to actually report cybercrime. If you've been the victim of identity theft, there's 2 really good resources. The Federal Trade Commission has identitytheft.gov, and then the Identity Theft Resource Center at idtheftcenter.org. They have things like a checklist, like a step-by-step guide of what to do if your identity has been stolen. You know, you can get a new credit card, you can't get a new social security number. So, you know, it's difficult to stop somebody out there who's got a driver's license with their picture but your name on it. So, so that can be a problem that takes a little while to dig out of, and those resources are super, super helpful. Let's talk a minute about people's feelings. We talked about attitudes and some behaviors. We asked people how they felt about this statement. I find cybersecurity intimidating. And unfortunately, when you add up the agree and strongly agree columns, that most people do find cybersecurity intimidating. And to me, it's no wonder, because they're used to this guy, right? And this guy is very intimidating. He doesn't even have a face. And I think this is a problem in the cybersecurity industry. Those of us who see all these bad things happening all day and are familiar with how the internet gets used in some really bad ways, we tend to use a little bit too much FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt when we communicate about cybersecurity issues. And we use images of hackers in hoodies and skulls and crossbones and all types of scary imagery to try and communicate about cybersecurity. And I think the end result there is that people feel intimidated. We also ask people if they find staying secure frustrating. And unfortunately, the numbers aren't exactly in our favor here either. So if security makes your employees feel like this, that's a problem. People want things to be quick. People want things to be easy. And so talking about things like a password manager and how quick and easy it can be to use. In fact, once you get used to using one, when I go to start a new account online somewhere, it can create a long, complex password that fits all those password rules of that particular account much faster than I can at the click of a button. So there are ways that security can actually be more convenient and help us be more efficient, but we don't talk about those enough. And we use words, not only do we use pictures of hackers and hoodies, but we also use words like threat and attack and militaristic language that your average employee, your average human can also find intimidating, and that can evoke more of a fight or flight response, and they just run away. If you tell the average person that they're under threat, they just run away. They don't want to engage. And that's the problem. We need people to engage with these things. We need people to be paying attention to things like phishing emails and malicious websites. But the tone and the language that we're using and the imagery that we're using doesn't make people feel like this. And we want them to feel like this. You want your employees to feel empowered. And so I think we need to lean in more to positivity, to positive language, to talking about how easy some of these things can be to use, and how good you can feel and the peace of mind that you can have. So I used to work for a company that created security training, and I worked with a designer for quite some time. And at one point we were doing a module about passwords, and he was telling me that he had just started using a password manager. And he said, Lisa, after all these years of working with you, I finally chose a password manager for my wife and I to use for all of our accounts. And he said, I feel so much better now. I have peace of mind. I don't worry about this stuff anymore. So I've got this picture here because I believe that we have a bright digital future. I believe that if we can be more positive, if we can encourage our employees, if we can express that education in these areas, it's not just about policies and the employee handbook and telling people what they must do. It's about educating people to feel empowered, to feel smarter than the bad guy, to feel like they can overcome these things, and it's not all scary and it's not all frustrating. So I would encourage you to be positive when you talk about these things instead of scaring your employees. So that's it for me today. I'm happy to have some open discussion or take some questions. Again, this is our website, staysafeonline.org. You can sign up to be a champion right now for Data Privacy Week coming up in January. And then every October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. You can sign up to be a champion for that as well. When you sign up to be a champion, you get access to materials that you can use to train your employees or to just kind of spread the word about good security and privacy practices. We have a series of, we're constantly doing webinars and virtual events, and we're actually going to go back to having in-person events next year. That's soon to be announced. We're going to try and have our first in-person event in the Scottsdale area at the very beginning of March. We're going to start some quarterly events next year. And then we also have our Cybersecure My Business program that we are in the process of revamping our curriculum right now, but those are workshops that small business people can attend and actually come out of that workshop with a plan that you can implement at your business. Very practical, very hands-on approach. So stay tuned for more information on our new revamped version of those workshops. If you go to our website and sign up, you can get in our database, and then you'll get a newsletter about everything that's happening.
So Lisa, thank you so much. We do have a few questions. Before I get to the questions, we have 3 poll questions that we've historically done on every single one of these sessions. It's good feedback for us. It's also something that we provide to our the Nodeware Advisory Council. The first poll we have up here right now, if everyone could fill this out, we would appreciate it. It gives us a feel for the audience and the materials. And if while they're filling it out, if Lisa, we got a first question, which is, I'm a small business owner and I don't have anybody that does IT for me. How do I get started educating my employees on some of this email issues that are coming up?
So most of the vendors that, if you just Google security training and awareness, you will find a whole bunch of vendors out there that sell training modules, but the vast majority of them also have free content for small businesses. We have free content on our website. If you sign up to be a champion, you'll get access to free training content. So we've got things like tip sheets and infographics. We have, Cisco has made some, or maybe it was Adobe. Sorry, I've forgotten. On our website, we've got videos, training videos that are sort of comedic, very lighthearted. They're on YouTube. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can find them there. But having your employees watch those, sending out links to those, like in an employee newsletter once a week or what have you. Some of those they're not heavy-handed, they're not boring. You don't have to have a learning management system just to send out a link and ask your employees to watch a video once a week, for example. And then, like I said, a lot of the vendors in the space all have free offerings of training content that you can use to educate your employees. You really don't have to spend money on it, believe it or not. There's between our nonprofit and the companies in the space. I think Microsoft customers have access to some free training with O365. Who else has put out training content lately? Google has a couple of free modules out there.
We just had Bradford Wilkie from CISA on our session last month, and he talked about some of the CISA essential programs that are out there that provide some of the free education and training.
Yeah, FTC.gov has free training videos as well on their website, which are probably also accessible through YouTube. Those are really well done. The FTC ones are really well done as well. I think the days of assigning really boring, laborious, long training to employees are over. There's enough good content out there that the employees won't hate it and might actually learn something.
And I think it's a combination of the SMB leaders and the SMB owners. They don't want to spend the time to be briefed on those things, and they don't want to roll them out because they don't feel like it's going to be a positive experience for their employees. So short, simple, and things work very well. It gets, if I just reference the last poll, 60% of the people on today's session either work for a managed service provider and help support small businesses, and they're a key part of what we do. We deliver Nodeware to MSPs that then support small businesses. And 20% of the people on the call are actually work for a small or medium-sized business that probably are on this to learn about how they can better educate their employees at the same time. So I think that fits well with what we're doing. I'd like to move to the second poll. And at the same time, Lisa, ask you some questions about, what do you see as it relates to training with people working remote in a hybrid workforce, versus 2 years ago where the vast majority of the people were in an office environment?
I've seen some studies that people perceive that they're better protected when they're in an office environment. but they also then exhibit more risky behavior, believe it or not, because they perceive that there's somebody else that's got technology in place that's going to protect me. And so I might click on more things than I might have done at home when I feel more responsible for my own security, because there's not, that help desk down the hall. So oddly enough, when people are at home, they're more careful with what they click on the web than when they're in an office scenario. It's really, this study was really interesting. I think the line is more blurred than ever between home and work. And the more you can talk to employees about not just protecting the organization, but protecting themselves and protecting their families. Human beings, whether they're parents, children, or employees, they're all the same person, right? So if you can establish a habit in somebody in their personal lives, that's going to carry through to their work life. And because it's all blurred these days, we're all working from home. I have the pleasure of actually being in an office today, which is a great change of pace these days. The more you can establish those habits, those are going to carry through. So I see a lot of people doing training and awareness content on, for example, in September, back to school security. What do you need to know about keeping your kids safe online? Or right now we're in the midst of holiday shopping. So how do you do that securely? How do you, make sure that email you've gotten saying that you have a package coming, or that it's a receipt from Amazon for something somebody purchased, how do you make sure that email is actually legit, or that text is legit and not a phish? That kind of knowledge and those kind of habits, if you talk about those topics in ways that apply to somebody's personal life, those habits are going to carry through to the way they protect your business, just like they're protecting their family.
Yeah, that's fascinating that your research showed that people are a little bit more, they take less chances, if you will, when they're at home than they're at work, because they think there's some overarching capability to take care of them at work. It plays one to our next poll question around how often do you look at scanning and your devices. But also, interestingly, to your point, we've had a few law firms that have decided to use Nodeware because they wanted to do daily scanning and they wanted to do weekly reports, because they no longer found it effective to have monthly scanning and monthly reports with the levers that the bad guys are pulling and the frequency that they're doing it with. Do you see anything about the frequency of attacks on different organizations increasing, or is it just more of an overall effect?
It's definitely increased with COVID. I mean, there was a huge spike when COVID first happened. And I haven't looked at data lately. We kind of hit this new high, and there's it's been a new normal. As far as attacks on your employees, things like phishing emails and malicious texts, things like that. COVID has just given the bad guys another topic to use for phishing, right? Like initially it was information on the virus itself and on the lockdown, and then it was, honestly, it was things like, where to find toilet paper. If you think about the early days of COVID and all the hoarding and everything, and then where to find PPE, because that was in short supply. So any kind of topic that was urgent and emotional, that could pull on your, press those emotional levers of your employees. It could be, then it was information on whether or not a vaccine was coming, where to get the vaccine. When it first came out, they were in short supply. So anything that's topical, the bad guys read the news. They read the business press. I worked at a company that was spun off from another major corporation. And on the day of that spinoff, they knew that we were standing up a brand new security function. And we saw a lot more attacks on that day than we normally would. because they knew that we were in the midst of organizational change. So they just take advantage of current events. You know, when there's a new vulnerability out there that's just as we've had recently, that's made the news. They are just like we are racing to patch, they are racing to attack before we patch. So so I would just say that, you know, they're just like we try in the business world to take advantage of market conditions, they do the exact same thing.
You know, it's interesting on this, on that, the answer to that poll question. That's kind of what we see. 50% of the small businesses that we talk to say they're never going to find me. It's never going to hit me. I don't have to worry about it. And 50% are aggressively doing scanning and vulnerability testing so they can stay on top of it. It's just fascinating when you look at, you know, companies 5 employees to 500 employees in the United States. That's 2.3 million companies. And those 2.3 million companies, if half of them aren't doing anything as it relates to, you know, daily scanning, that gets to an interesting scenario.
It's a myth to think that you're not being targeted and that nobody knows who you are. It's those days are over.
To that point, as it relates to that, are you seeing an increase in with people working at home? I know you mentioned that people feel like they're more secure at the office. Are you seeing people doing things differently if they're on a corporate device working at home on their corporate device versus if they carry their corporate device into their office network? Does their behavior change?
I haven't seen any research on that. I can't speak to that, but that would be really something interesting to look at for sure. Yeah.
Well, I know we, you know, so like we provide an agent that runs on a corporate device as a laptop, if you will. So when you take it to your home and you're not on the network, the office network, you still can be scanned for vulnerabilities, and the IT organization or the MSP can get an immediate alert if something happens on your device. But we now have people using, excuse me, sensors on their laptops at home so they can see what's on their home network, because now they're worried about the printers, the doorbells,
Right.
the cameras that they have, because those are the way people have been getting in lately. So
Yeah.
they're worried about how are they getting access to their home network and then getting access to the corporate device through the printer, through the camera, and then getting access to critical data. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any research to support that.
I have not, but that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Okay. If you could scroll to the next screen, if you would. I think it talks about, we've got another webinar coming up in January. Yeah, so it's on our website. If you're interested in going to the website to sign up for the webinar that we have specifically around, we have an MSP located out in California that is doing nationwide support to help nonprofits. Nonprofits tend to not have much in the way of IT and IT support, yet they have a lot of critical data and a lot of PII information, and potentially some credit cards that they're using for donations and the like. So we have an MSP that's supporting nonprofits organizations. That event will take place January 20th. Feel free to go to our website and sign up for that. And then Lisa, just curious, you know, from a closing thought standpoint, you know, if I'm a small business owner, what, you know, and I haven't done anything yet, you know, are there a couple of things that I should do before the holidays with my employees when most of them are going to be on corporate devices and most of them are going to be working from home? You know, any initial thoughts and guidance that I can get?
Training your employees with the free training content that's out there from us or from the FTC or any of the vendors. Training your employees is one of the cheapest, easiest things you can do. You know, for all the technology that we put in place, honestly, you know, one click from an employee on the wrong thing can give you a really bad day. So don't leave out that people aspect, right? There's kind of 3 legs to the security stool: the people, process, and technology. And we often overlook that people element, that human element. But it can be, you know, the ROI on that can be huge because it's cheap, if not free, to do. And that's really a culture piece, right? If they see you as a business owner, as a leader, talking about it, you know, sending out a short email that says, hey, we found these videos, don't forget to, you know, watch for phishing emails, watch what you do online, you know, use this, you know, implementing things like a password manager, making sure you're using multi-factor authentication on everything. Those are not difficult, complex, or expensive things to do, but they can go a really long way.
If you wouldn't mind scrolling up a couple of slides back to your a couple of those URLs that you have. So yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yep.
If you have a last question before we hang up, please feel free to submit it now. We just did get a question about the presentation. Yes, the presentation will be available. The recording will be available. We will get that out to everybody. You'll be able to get it off our website, and you can go to our YouTube channel. You'll get the presentation. You'll get the recording as well. These are obviously some important locations for you to get information on what the National Cybersecurity Alliance is doing. As I said, we're going to continue to have these public service announcement type educational discussions. Please participate in our LinkedIn group, collaborate with your peers, get questions asked and answered. And as important as anything else, you know, I go back to what Alan Alford said about the 3 steps, you know, the 3 pieces of the stool, you know, which were, you know, understand what devices you have that are vulnerable, and make sure you're immediately alerted when a new device comes on your system, implement multi-factor authentication, and begin to do some training, even simple and easy training. And I would add a 4th leg to the stool, which is connect yourself with a local MSP that can provide you local support and assistance to all of the things that you're working on. That's clearly what we think is critical, and we think it's critical to small businesses, especially that 50% that don't think it's ever going to hit them. So, Lisa, with that, I will turn it back over to you for some closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to visit our website, and if you fill out one of the forms in there and get into our database, you can get information on our upcoming small business workshops. And again, those are just going to be super practical, NIST-based steps on how you can keep your business secure. You'll come out of there, there's a workbook, it's very interactive, and you'll come out of there with a very simple plan that you can implement, and we'll be following up with you on for additional resources, seeing how you're doing implementing your plan. So if you want to get into our database and hear about those upcoming workshops, then I would encourage you to visit our website.
You know, Lisa, just one last point. We started off this public service announcement sessions in the spring talking about NIST and talking about the CIS 18 and how do you take the first few steps to, you know, get to data gathering or get to PCI compliance. Any thoughts you have on, if you're a small business, on some steps you ought to take towards moving towards compliance without obviously having all the resources to get all the way there?
Well, I feel like that's a whole nother webinar.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I would say stay tuned for our workshop series. We'll be covering things like that.
Between your series and with Ron Ross and some of the others, we will cover, you know, how do you take a couple of steps towards getting towards compliance in 2022.
Yep, it does, and it doesn't all have to be difficult and expensive. There are steps you can take that are easy to do, and I would say can also make your business more efficient, right? I think a lot of times we think security is going to be onerous, and it can actually help us be more efficient and effective in our businesses. It doesn't have to be a burden. Yeah.
Well, we're very appreciative of the National Cybersecurity Alliance and all the work your organization does. We're glad to be a champion on that program, and we're looking forward to doing more, you know, with you to help educate small business leaders and owners in 2022. With that, I want to wish everybody a safe and happy holidays and a happy new year. And we'll see you back on January 20th for our next session. With that, thank you so much. Lisa, feel free to say goodbye, and you can close this out for us.
Thanks for having us. Happy holidays, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody, and have a great day.